Right. Well, I thought I would just skip my slides and just tell you a story or a couple of stories. My name is Hilary Swain. I am the very recently retired director of Archbold Biological Station. I retired last week after 30 years. Yes. The good news is I'll be continuing on in emerita capacity and doing all the things I love. So I look forward to continuing to be 100% engaged. Archbold is at the southern end of the Lake Wales Ridge. Put up your hand, and it's fine if you don't know, if you know where the Lake Wales Ridge is. That's very, people have referred to this several times today, and there's nothing embarrassing about not knowing where the Lake Wales Ridge is. It's an ancient sandy ridge that runs through the middle of Florida, starts in Orlando, runs 116 miles south like a thin little spine, 10 to 15 miles wide. And it's 1 to 2 to 3 million years old, depending on your sort of where you are on the ridge. It goes up to, it's anything from 100 to 300 feet above sea level. So this ridge is really our sort of special, privileged, sort of ancient land in Florida. And as sea level, quite rightly, we saw it many times a day, came and went, and came and went, and came and went. The Lake Wales Ridge stood above it all. It's sand derived from outwash from Georgia. It's sand that washed down the coast. So it is not limestone, even though it's white. It's silica sand, acid, sandy soils, running like an ancient thin ridge coming through the middle of Florida. If you've ever driven from Sarasota over to Fort Pierce, I can assure you, you've crossed the Lake Wales Ridge. You'll have imperceptibly gone up and imperceptibly gone down. And if you'd been there a million years ago, on the east side, you'd have been looking at the crashing Atlantic Ocean. And on the west side, you'd have been looking at the lapping Gulf Coast. At the extreme south end of the ridge, due to a series of amazing, fortuitous and serendipitous events, one of Florida's great ecological research stations was established, Archbold Biological Station. We have a lot of fantastic marine labs in Florida, but probably less well known, we have some wonderful inland research stations. Archbold Biological Station is one, just about an hour and a half east of here. Tall Timbers in the north of Florida. And then more recently, the Disney Wilderness Preserve in Orlando, and Old Way Swisher, which is now part of University of Florida. And in those places, does anyone actually know what a biological research field station is? Put up your hand if you're really confident. Okay, this is another good chance for me. A biological research station is an area of land, often a beautiful natural community, where scientists and students and interested members of the public can come to study ecosystems. So they're usually intact, often very beautiful, and usually very important for biodiversity. And that is certainly the case for Archbold. At the end of the Lake Wales Ridge, it is one of our great centers of biodiversity, just like a little Galapagos or a little, sort of Hawaiian Islands. As sea level came and went and came and went and was never glaciated, always a big strength. If you want to be biodiverse, avoid glaciation.
Yeah.
So you have this extraordinary endemism, a species only found here in Florida, and ecosystems that are sort of pretty well limited to Florida, and species that are sort of flagship species for Florida conservation. And the biological field station was established here in 1941, and that, somebody said, I think it was you, Pam Saltus, earlier today, said, we usually don't have time to track change. It takes a lot of effort and a lot of people and a lot of time. And that's what Archbold has gifted the state of Florida. We've been there from 1941, measuring inventory, tracking the weather, tracking species, tracking co-located all these wonderful streams of data and information that together tell us a wonderful story of Florida. And the story at Archbold actually starts, amazingly enough, because we weren't around 44,000 years ago, because sheer serendipity, we have a lake on Archbold. It's called Lake Annie, 67 feet deep, and the sediments go down 38 feet. And from that, you can go back 44,000 years. and you can look at the changing climate in Florida over 44,000 years. I can't remember who was talking about the Younger Dryas. Somebody was talking about the Younger Dryas. You can see it there in Lake Annie. You can see when sea level was much lower, and 20,000 years ago, you can see because of the pollen records, you can see we were dominated by very dry oak scrub and rosemary balls and really dry ecosystem. And then about 7,000 years ago in Lake Annie, sure enough, pines came along, grasses came along, and we got into the modern, the Holocene environment, which we're still in. So Lake Annie gives us an amazing window into the past. But what is really interesting is if you have the fortitude, and I mean fortitude, to dig through those sediment records, and they are just like those cores preserved in those giant freezers, all of those cores are super important. You can see it's a lot of the same species all the way back. Sometimes they sort of really diminish. It's like looking at a Persian rug, and sometimes some colors are really dominant, some pollen, and then other times other pollen species are much more common. So, but often species are there the whole time. And what that tells us is in this resilient ecosystem, those species have persisted. They've persisted. Sometimes they've really been very significant, sometimes less so. New species have, come and gone, but a lot of species have stayed the same. This is a lesson for us and the power of resilience for a Florida ecosystem. Here is this ancient, nutrient-poor ecosystem in the middle of Florida, and yet it has survived droughts and extreme sea level change. It's got the capacity, it's like a Swiss bank account with a lot of money, and it's just survived that whole time because of this incredible capacity to adapt to changing conditions. The biggest thing it hasn't been able to survive is in the last, since the 1940s or maybe 1920s, it lost 85% of its habitat due to land use change, largely agriculture to begin with, and now more recently development. And now we have little patches of scrub all the way up and down the ridge. We don't have continuous habitat. And of course, habitat loss has been and will continue to be the biggest threat to Florida scrub habitat. You cannot capture 2 million years of evolution. That is hard to recreate, that sheer complexity. We have about 10,000 species at Archbold. We're one of the best inventoried sites in the world. But it's really hard to capture that level of complexity and all of the relationships among species in such an ancient system. What we can do is understand this is the action and commitment part. How do we help to maintain that ecosystem over time, given the sort of threats that surround it? And the threats include obviously, increasing habitat loss up and down the ridge and elsewhere in Florida, and the propensity for climate change, and I'll talk about that in a minute. The usual Ellis Island effect. Florida is like Ellis Islands for invasives and emerging diseases. You name it, we get it. It comes in here. Port of Miami, number one culprit. But how do we maintain resilience? What are the actions and commitments we can take to maintain resilience? And I'm going to use one species to just illustrate that. And that's the Florida scrub jay, which is it should be our state bird, but let's not go there. It's a Florida endemic, only found in these ancient ridges in Florida, really limited in numbers, and lost more than 90% of its population. And what Archbold has been working on Florida scrub jays since 1967. We do the hard work. We go out every month. We measure, we find every individual, count them all. We watch all these trends. We have weather data going out the gazoo. We know what happened to them in cold winters, in wet winters, in dry summers, every option you can imagine. And we've tracked over 9,000 scrub jays over this time. So that's the database to die for, guys. And it's also, we have their blood records from 1990 onwards. I mean, this is an incredible database. So we can really say, what is the impact of all of these factors and what can we do about it? Number one, you're all interested in climate change. And at Archbold, we do The most noticeable thing is climate in Florida is very hard to track over time. It's so crazy year to year. If you're looking for long-term deterministic change, it's a tough thing to deal with. We have, seasonal change, and then we have El Nino, La Nina, and then we have the big, what are called Atlantic multi-decadal events, 30-year cycles, and then we have the Pacific decadal events, 20-year cycles. It's really hard to pick out little trends in all of that. But we can see in the Archbold data that our maximum temperatures, so really hot temperatures in winter, are getting warmer. And in response to that, we can see that Florida scrub jays are breeding slightly earlier in warmer winters. And the consequence of that, and it takes about 40 to 50 years of data to say this, the consequence of that is because they're breeding earlier, they are less successful in their nest production. So earlier years, the timing is off with the timing of everything else. Food production, everything doesn't all follow suit. So they are doing less well in warm winters. We haven't seen that in the population trends so far. So, if you were just measuring Florida scrub jays as accurate as you would do as Archbold, you wouldn't, it goes up and down and up and down. The biggest changes have been 4 big disease impacts over the years. They've all been Eastern equine encephalitis that have each time really wiped out the population that's recovered from that. But what we can do for scrub jays is, number one, this is a really good phrase in Florida, not a bad phrase, burn, baby, burn. We are the fire state. And it's one of the things that often comes up in Florida. So many people, we put on something about the importance of fire, prescribed fire, mimicking natural fire cycles. Florida has always burned. Okay, deep cypress domes and mangrove systems did not burn, but the vast majority of ecosystems in Florida are burning all of the time. And we have to mimic that with prescribed fire now. So the most important thing for scrub jays is to have regular implemented fire. You can't imagine how often on social media we get long diatribes about how much climate change has been affected by fire in Florida. It's a very common reaction. You don't know how much you're ruining the climate by prescribed burning Florida. It took a lot of time and a lot of years, but not true. As we go through those cycles, yes, you lose carbon when you burn wood. We all know that. Poof. But you also get refreshed growth, a lot of resprouting, a lot of photosynthesis for the next few decades, and a lot of what's recalcitrant or black carbon goes into the sand. So on average, not very much, but on average, over a fire cycle, you are actually a small increase in carbon over time. So number one thing, burn. Number two thing, like Mallory just talked about, connectivity is really important. Even when you can fly, you're not much... scrub jays are not much flyers, they're kind of useless. But connectivity to get from one scrub patch to another is really important. And one thing I'm really proud about at Archbold is when I first got there, we were 4,500 acres. We're now 20,000 acres. And when I first got there, our little patch of scrub was part of an 8,000 acre block. And we're now part of a 157,000 acre connected block. And that means that Florida scrub jays can fly from one scrub patch to another. And, you might be absolutely appalled at what we've lost, in Florida. But we should be absolutely amazed at what we've managed to save. I mean, more than 30%. We were at 21% 30 years ago. We're at 31% now. That is an extraordinary achievement. We've got so much more to do, but there's commitment. This state is committed to connectivity. And the last thing is what you call translocations or assisted migrations. I loved all the coral stories. They were so fantastic, but we're very, very busy inland doing all of that as well. So we're translocating red-cockaded woodpeckers and grasshopper sparrows and Florida scrub jays. And we have to know all the genetics, and we have to know, it's like running a giant zoo stud book, like who should go there and who should go here in order to have success. But it does mean that we can, it's called genetic rescue. To what degree can we rescue populations and establish them in places where we've got the habitat back to shape, but they haven't actually got there? So that would be, the sort of fourth element is track changes over time, manage the land properly, ensure connectivity, and look for assisted migration when possible. There you go.
Thank you, Hilary.